election year politicking. Obviously, one of the things that we're interested in are the transportation bills. There are two major transportation bills out there, both of which are going to see considerable attention from the Congress as we move forward this month and next month. First is the aviation bill. That bill has been a long time since it expired, and it's been run by a series of 22 extensions. The most recent extension will run out at the end of January, and so Congress has to do something in this very short window that it's here in January to either extend that program again or to finish work on the reauthorization bill that they are currently working on. It's a multi-year bill. The multi-year aviation bill is for most of it is completed. 95% of it is completed. It's about 5 or 6 issues that are still outstanding. And 4 or 5 of those issues really deal with aviation directly. One of the issues is a labor-related issue that deals with the National Mediation Board, which does have jurisdiction over the Rail Labor Act, and aviation is under the Rail Labor Act, so that's why the provision is in this bill. But it's a very controversial provision. It's a very partisan provision where most Democrats are opposed to the provision, and most of the Republicans are pushing for the provision. That particular provision is actually being negotiated up at the leadership level, so Speaker Boehner and Majority Leader Reid in the Senate are really negotiating that provision, and it's that labor provision that's really holding up the aviation bill. If the two leaders were able to work out an agreement on how that provision would be handled, the remaining 4 or 5 aviation, more directly aviation-related provisions could be worked out very quickly by the Transportation Committee and the Senate Commerce Committee. So that bill, it's unclear what's going to happen to it. Is there a chance that the labor provision could get resolved and these other issues decided in a way that the bill, multi-year bill, could actually be enacted by the end of January? The answer is yes. If you ask how likely is that, it's probably not too likely. We're most likely going to see an extension again, and that bill is going to just drag on until one side or the other blinks on the labor provision. Let's move over to the surface bill. The surface bill is actually starting to pick up steam. Both the House and Senate committees are beginning to move forward with the surface bill. And a good factor on the surface bill is that it not only is moving through the committees, but it has the attention and the commitment of the leadership to do something on it. On the House side, Speaker Boehner and the Republican leadership have indicated that this bill is a priority. They want to pass it through the House. On the Senate side, Senator Reid has indicated it is a priority for the Senate. And so that's always good when you're trying to move a bill through committee. A lot of times the committees are moving it, but the leadership isn't all that interested in it. And so it languishes for a while. But here, both leaders of the House and Senate have indicated a desire to move the bill. And part of the reason for that is both of them are viewing this as a jobs bill, and the parties want to do something on jobs. So Senator Reid wants to support this as one of the Senate's jobs initiatives. Speaker Boehner doesn't have a lot of things to point to on the jobs front, so they want to be able to point to this bill, which has to be done as a jobs bill. And so I do think that that's a helpful thing in trying to move forward with the legislation. Let's look at each body now. Let's start with the Senate. The Senate Environment and Public Works Committee has actually reported out their portion of the bill, known as MAP 21. It's the portion of the bill that really deals with the highway program, and that's the part that's of most interest and importance to the Ports to Plains Alliance. That piece of it is out there. You all have copies of it. There are some provisions we're looking in there dealing with freight to make sure that the Ports to Plains is adequately covered. The Senate's it's taking a 2-year approach. It's a bipartisan bill. It came out of committee unanimously. Senator Boxer and Senator Inhofe have worked closely together on the bill. And so that bill is out there moving forward. Their desire is to take that to the Senate floor as soon as they can. However, as I mentioned, they only have jurisdiction over the highway portion of it. There's also a transit portion. There's a highway safety and rail-related provisions in it, and those come under the jurisdiction in the Senate of other committees. And the rail provisions, some of the freight provisions, planning provisions, and some of the highway safety provisions come under the jurisdiction of the Commerce Committee. And before Congress left in December, the Commerce Committee actually did report out its portion of the bill. That did not go as smoothly as it did for the Environment and Public Works Committee. Senator Hutchinson felt as though they hadn't been given enough time to look at it, that it wasn't on the agenda, and so the Republicans on the committee objected to the provisions that were being offered and indicated that they would be challenging them on the Senate floor. The Commerce Committee has a dispute on its own provisions in the bill. The third piece of it is the transit portion that provides money to the for public transportation, both urban and rural. That comes out of the Banking Committee, and that committee has not acted yet. So that committee still has to act. I think they're looking to maybe act in late January or early February for their portion of the bill. Once those three committees that have jurisdiction over the overall programs report their versions, the bill is kind of then ready to go to the floor, but they do have to reconcile the provisions. Sometimes there's overlapping provisions, and so the three committees do have some work to do to make sure that the combined package makes sense once they add these three provisions to one bill. So the Senate still has a ways to go on that front. Now, on a bigger picture, in the 2-year bill that the Senate has, as we have talked about on previous calls, one of the big problems facing this program is the Highway Trust Fund is insolvent, and the Senate is basically proposing to continue funding the program at current levels of funding for this 2-year period. And the theory is at the end of the 2 years, after the presidential election, there'd be a chance to, quote unquote, do the right thing and come up with more revenues to be able to increase spending on this program, over which there's a lot of support for doing that. But nevertheless, this 2-year bill would be at current levels, but the trust fund can't support current levels. They're about $12 to $13 billion short. And so the Senate Finance Committee that will be typically has a portion of the bill that provides an extension of the taxes that go into the trust fund, an extension of the trust fund. The Senate Finance Committee is looking for $12 to $13 billion that will basically fill this gap that exists between what the trust fund can support and the funding levels of the bill. And as of this moment, there still is not agreement between Republicans and Democrats on how to come up with that $12 to $13 billion that the trust fund needs. So the Senate's moving forward. The majority leader has indicated this is a priority. 2 of the committees have actually reported their products. The other committee is moving forward. and hopefully we'll have something out in the next few weeks. And the Senate Finance Committee is negotiating between Republicans and Democrats on how to come up with this $13 billion. I think that Senator Reid has indicated he would be hopeful of getting the bill on the Senate floor in February, but he is not committed to a particular time at this point, so there's no guarantee that they actually have Senate floor time right now. And again, if you think back to that first slide we had up, at the end of February, they have to deal with the unemployment insurance, the doc fix, the payroll tax provisions that have been extended for this 2-month period. That will be very controversial, so that could basically take a lot of the Senate's attention in the end of February. So how the transportation bill will fit in with all of that going on remains to be seen. But anyway, that's the status in the Senate. Now, if we go over to the House is not as far along as the Senate is. Although, as I mentioned before, Speaker Boehner has indicated his support for this program. He sees this as part of the Republicans' jobs initiative, and so they want to bring this bill up. Now, obviously, I should have mentioned before, something you all know is that the program is due to expire on March 31st, so something needs to be done by March 31st, either completion of action on the multi-year bill or another extension of some length. To give the members more time to work on it if they're not finished. But the House has to do something by March 31st, and Speaker Boehner is supporting moving a multi-year bill. Now, the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee is the key committee on the House side because they have jurisdiction over all 3 of the areas that we mentioned in the Senate. They have jurisdiction over highways, they have jurisdiction over mass transit, and they have jurisdiction over rail and highway safety related issues. So on the House side, instead of 3 committees having to act, you really only need the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee to act. They have said that their bill is basically ready. They have shared about 80 to 85% of it with the Democrats on the committee. There's another 15% or so of the bill that the Democrats have not yet seen. I think the schedule that the House committee would like to meet is to release the bill late next week or early the following week, and then mark it up in committee that first week in February, and bring it to the House floor the second week of February, and basically have it completed in the House action before the House leaves for a recess that's taking place in the 3rd week of February. So that's their kind of goal. It's a very ambitious one given where they are right now, where there's no bill has even been circulated to anybody at this point. So they've got a long ways to go to try to be ready for that schedule, but that's kind of what they're heading toward, but obviously that could slip. The T&I committee has a number of issues associated with it, the bill. They also have done a rather dramatic change from where they were at the start of the year. The House at the start of this new Congress was looking to cut the program by 25% to live within the means of the trust fund, but they basically reversed course on that and decided to, with the support of the leadership, to try to get the program up to basically current levels of funding. And so they're trying to get it something up at roughly at the current levels. But the House is looking for a 5-year bill instead of a 2-year bill. And part of what's driving that is that in the House, there are these rules that members can only be chairman or ranking member for 6 years, and then has to turn over to somebody else. And so there are term limits on committee chair, ranking members, and chairmen. And the way it's been interpreted is that it's a combined. You combine your years as ranking member and your years as chairman. When you reach 6, boom, you're out. Somebody else is in. And Chairman Mica is in his 6th year. And so unless he gets a waiver from the Republican conference next year, assuming that the Republicans retain control of the House, in the next Congress he would not be chairman of the committee. And so he kind of views this bill as his legacy bill, and is really that's one of the reasons that he's pushing for a 5-year bill instead of a 2-year bill, so that it's more of a legacy and has more policies in it that will be in for at least a 5-year period. So the fact that the House wants to do a 5-year bill and they're trying to get it, quote unquote, as close to current levels as possible means that they have a bigger funding gap than the Senate did. The Senate has, as we mentioned before, had to come up with $12 to $13 billion. The House has had to come up with something in the order of, depending on the estimates that you hear, anywhere from $50 to $70 billion over this 5-year period to support a bill that gets close to or at current levels of spending. So the House has obviously been scrambling for revenues as well. How do you fill this 50 to 60, $70 billion hole that exists? And one idea that they came up with was to add to the House bill provisions that have never been part of the bills before, and that's a whole separate title with energy production, increased production bills, opening up ANWR, opening up the Outer Continental Shelf. I think you've heard people talk about these bills that would drill bills. 3 bills that would really make it much, much easier to, which would have the effect of opening up a lot of production. And the theory of that was that they would take the royalties from that increased production and put it into the trust fund, and they would pay for the program that way. And so as of right now, that is the plan, to add these bills to the basic transportation bill. And the curveball that they were thrown was that CBO didn't score the revenues from the royalties as favorably as they would have liked, in part because there's a dispute over really how much development will really take place under the bill, and then secondly, when will those revenues actually flow? And obviously it takes a long time to bring on these areas, and so CBO has, I think, estimated that there'll only be about $9 billion over the next 10 years. And so that's just a very small portion of what the committee needs to fill the hole. And so the bill hasn't, that approach of adding that hasn't really solved their funding problem for the bill itself. Now in the long term, they say this will help the trust fund in the long term because it will provide another source of revenues. Another problem that they've run into is those revenues now, a lot of them go to the coastal states and to Alaska. They stay in state, so to speak, when those royalties have come forward. And in order to take a portion of them and put them in the trust fund, that means states won't get as much as they would have otherwise gotten, and so they're having, I think, some trouble with the coastal states, and so they're still trying to work out that portion of it. So let's assume they get it worked out, and that contributes a little bit of revenue to fill the hole. They still have a much bigger piece to fill the hole with, and they supposedly have some secret offset that they plan on using that they have not divulged. It's not clear what committee would actually produce it. That's why I have others up on the chart, because another committee might have to have another title in the bill that produces the savings that will offset the increased spending. And so that's another thing that remains to be seen as to exactly what that is and whether or not, what kind of support it's going to have. Now, when you step back and you look at this overall bill, one thing that's going to be very clear, I think, is that this is not going to be a bipartisan product the way the Senate Environment and Public Works Committee bill is, or the traditionally has been the case with these major transportation bills, where traditionally they have had broad support on both sides of the aisle, political aisle, and for three reasons. First, the House T&I Committee, it doesn't appear as though the Democrats may not be able to support the bill with some of the provisions that the committee's talking about putting in there, some of which they haven't even shared with the Democrats yet. Secondly, the energy title is going to be very controversial, one that most Democrats in the past have not supported. And third, depending on where this other offset, this secret offset comes from, that could be controversial. There have been rumors that it's some Medicare fix, and if that were the case, it would give it the perception that you're cutting Medicare to build highways. And so there are going to be a lot of members, especially on the Democratic side of the aisle, but I think a lot of members in both parties, they're going to have trouble with making it look to the public like we're using Medicare funds to fund the highway program. So, and of course, Ways and Means has to act to put in, extend the existing taxes, extend the trust fund, and then deal with whatever this new source of revenue is, or this offset that's being proposed. So on the House side, one of the unfortunate things, in my personal view, is that this bill could turn out to pass on a very partisan vote, where it's really passing with Republican votes and not Democratic votes, which would be a break in tradition, and I don't think good for the long-term interests of the program. But that appears to be the path they're headed on in the House if all this, falls into place. Now, with respect to the bill itself that's coming out of the Transportation Committee, the committee staff is convinced, and you all have circulated before and you've seen the general outline that the committee produced. They think that the states are going to be very happy with this bill, that this bill, quote unquote, refocuses resources on real highway and transit construction, that it eliminates a lot of the frilly things, or at least doesn't require the money to be spent on them, gives the states flexibility. They have very aggressive provisions in there to streamline the program and make projects move more quickly. That could be one of the areas where they have problems with the Democrats on the committee, because if they're as aggressive as they're saying they are going to be, I'm sure the environmental groups are not going to be pleased with those portions of the bill. And so we'll have to obviously wait to see the substance of the bill until it's released, but from the indications that they're giving is that it's going to do a lot of things for the program that have needed to be done, and we'll have to see if there are things that have broad enough support to allow the bill to move across the House floor. The one aspect of what they're doing in the House is the fact that the overall bill will be much more controversial. There's some question as to why it was being done this way overall, and there's some who are on the cynical side who would look at this and say, well, this is just being done this way to get enough votes in the House to pass it with Republican votes, and it's really to inoculate the Republicans in the House on the jobs issue. They can say they passed the jobs bill, but this bill isn't going to have much of a chance in the Senate. The Senate's not going to go along with the drill provisions. Depending on what the secret offset is, they may not go along with the secret offset. And so, this is just an attempt to say we did something, and really with no real expectations that it can make it through the Senate. I think there's another way to look at this too. It's very positive to get a bill out across the House. At least you can get the conference that way, and then the conference can work out something that's acceptable to both bodies, and it gives you a chance to pass a multi-year bill by the end of March, or maybe even, hopefully soon after that if they can't do it. These bills are going to be big bills. I mean, the Senate title for just EPW is 600 pages, so the Senate bill will be over 1,000 pages when you add in from the rest of the committees. The House will be a big bill. These take a lot of time in conference to make sure you understand the differences and then work out compromises on all these provisions that will be different. And so if both committees are lucky and are able to get their bills through the House and Senate by the end of February, that still will only leave them 4 weeks to reconcile the differences in the bills and work out all these controversial provisions. And that's not a lot of time. Most transportation bills have taken more time than that in conference to really get done. And so, from a timing perspective, having this all finished by the end of March will be quite lucky. One other thing on the House bill is that when you talk to the people involved in the bill, they keep saying that people are going to be surprised, and it's not really clear what that means. And so I'm not really sure what else might be in there, but they keep saying that, and even after they've mentioned the things that I just mentioned on the phone, and really kind of even different than where the secret offset is coming from. So I'm not sure if there are other things in there that are going to be dramatic changes in policy that are going to really catch people's eye, and obviously we'll have to look at that when it comes out. But the House is portraying this bill as going to be quite an eye-opener to many people who are familiar with the program. So we'll have to see what's meant by that. The other aspect of this that is something in both the House and the Senate, and I found this out from all the years that I worked on transportation bills, the policy is all very important, but at the end of the day, states and members look at how much money they're getting. And neither committee has released anything that would indicate how the states are going to do under these bills. And on the Senate side, even though their bill's been out for quite a while, they've not released any funding tables showing the state-by-state breakdowns. To me, as somebody who worked up there before, the fact that the bill's been out, they've had all this time to do it, and they haven't released it, means to me that, they're worried that there are going to be some states in there that aren't going to like it, and then I don't really want to give them an awful lot of time to try to undermine the funding portion of the bill. On the House side, I think they're running into the same problem, that they realize that a lot of states could have trouble with the proposal, and therefore are, again, not in a rush to release any funding tables to show how much states are going to get one way or the other. And so that's another whole layer of complication on top of all that we talked about, is that once those funding tables get released, states have got to figure out what they got, why it was calculated that way, and whether or not, even if they like the rest of the bill, they simply can't support it because they feel that they're not getting a fair deal on the funding aspects of the bill. So there's definitely good news out there, and that both committees, both House and Senate, the movement is forward, that they have the attention of and the support of the leadership in getting these bills to the floor sooner rather than later and pass. That's all good news. The bad news is that there's still a lot of work to go in both bodies, and these bills haven't been out there to get tested, so to speak, and so there's going to be a lot of quick analysis that goes on once they're released, and people are trying to sort through what they really do and then they're running up against a very short deadline to have all this done by the end of March. And they've got a lot of controversial provisions that they're adding to these bills, which are going to make them, in some cases, partisan, and in some cases just controversial because of the nature of what's being changed. And those all can turn into potential stumbling blocks down the road. So that's an update on where the transportation bills stand in the House and Senate. And if anybody has any questions, I'd be more than pleased to try to answer.
Yeah, if you, as I mentioned in the chat messages, if you've got a question, you can either type it into the chat, you can do a question, or raise your hand and we'll unmute your mic. I'm not seeing any. Again, if you're in the process, let us know, and we'll stop with what we're doing and make sure that we've made that point. I'm going to go ahead and move on to the Washington, D.C. effort. We're planning our annual fly-in April 16th through the 20th. Monday and Tuesday morning are generally travel days to get to Washington, D.C. We do on Tuesday schedule overflow meetings that we're not being able to schedule on Wednesday and Thursday. We'll have our quarterly board meeting at Covington and Burling at 1 o'clock on Tuesday. We try to focus on the House side on Wednesday and the Senate side on Thursday. Again, that doesn't always work 100%, but the more we can keep it on one side or the other, the less time it takes to get from one meeting to the other. And then on Friday morning, we're going to host something we've not done before, and it's an energy mini summit. It is designed for elected officials and congressional staff to bring some of the things that we've talked about at our annual energy summits for the past 2 years to the folks in Washington, D.C. We are not going to hold a full energy summit this year, so this will be the energy event for the year. We very much are going to be inviting congressional members and staffers. We're going to try to set it up in a congressional meeting room. We have not yet determined that. In fact, we have a meeting conference call scheduled with some of the leadership of the caucus this afternoon to talk about some of these details. But really quickly, there's 3 things that we're putting on this agenda, and we're talking about a 2-hour meeting. We're going to talk about oil and gas prices and the consumer. You know, the opportunities in North America are certainly growing. There's lots of those decisions that are dependent upon the regulators. And all of these decisions have an effect on consumer oil and gas prices. Within that section of the presentations, we'll talk about hydraulic fracturing and the development of domestic opportunities. We'll talk about the Keystone XL pipeline and its role in energy security. And we'll talk about the incentives that the oil and gas folks get. There's lots of press about that. We want to be sure that the record is straight as to what the difference between an incentive is and a deduction or a credit. Second part of it is going to deal with electricity in the economy. Every sector of the economy is affected by the cost and availability of electricity. Renewable energy is providing many of our rural communities a great shot in the arm. There's a growing manufacturing of wind and solar that's taking place across the region. At the same time, coal continues to provide the majority of electricity, especially in the West. It creates rural jobs. The big question becomes, how do we create an electric future that supports the economy and the consumer? We'll talk there some about renewable energy production tax credits and the effect on rural communities. We're going to point out that all of this discussion is a long haul, but the sooner we can get in place policy where business can make decisions based on real things that don't dramatically increase the cost to the consumer, the better off we're going to be. The third piece ties the energy and transportation. We talk a lot about the Ports to Plains Alliance corridors creating that backbone for the energy corridor. We're seeing more and more stresses on the rural transportation system, and it's happening at a time when transportation funding is slowing. So what are the opportunities to address? We'll talk about the corridor. We'll talk about our ideas on a pilot permitting proposal. We've got an opportunity to connect to opportunity, transportation, energy, and the economy. There can be benefits all the way through. So we certainly hope that we get a good turnout and interest in that. There seems to be. In fact, this was originally a suggestion of a congressional staffer after being at one of our events, that having that in Washington, D.C. On a shorter time frame would be beneficial. So we're looking forward to that opportunity. If you think you might be interested in the Washington, D.C. fly-in, please plan on letting Duffy or Jackie at the Lubbock office know that you're interested, so that we can be sure we hold a hotel room for you. There'll be a deadline for actually saying yes or no, I'm coming. But right now, if you think you're coming, let us know so that we can block the right number of rooms. Duffy, do you have anything to add to that? I guess not.
I'm sorry, I had to unmute myself. No, can you hear me now?
Yes.
All right. No, I don't have anything to add to that. I was actually just putting in the chat to everyone. I was giving my email address. I think most of you have it, but just go ahead and email me if you think that there's a chance that you might want to attend this, so that I can make sure that we have plenty of rooms available at the hotel.
Okay, thank you, Duffy. I'm going to change the presenter over to Michael Reeves, the president of the Ports to Plains Alliance, and he's going to talk about Transportation Advocates of Texas.
Okay, thanks, Joe. Appreciate it. I know that everyone gets inundated with calls to join different transportation organizations, and I know we're all working together on these issues for transportation for everyone. And this is particularly applies to the folks in Texas. This is the group that I've been working with is Transportation Advocates of Texas, and it's a grassroots organization, and it's a lot of the transportation leaders from around the state. They have, in the basic premise is to advocate for more transportation funding and have a secure, stable source for transportation funding increases into the future. And we don't advocate for specific projects. It's really, trying to make the pie bigger for everyone so we can compete at that level. There is a regionally designated board of directors, and that assures representation from all parts of the state and includes the rural areas as well. And the group is very active in the Texas legislature. Among the issues we worked with on last legislative session was releasing the remaining bond funds for the Prop 12 money, which I think the Ports to Plains got about $250 million on projects out of that. The tax increment system for transportation zones that went on the ballot last year was something that this group worked pretty actively with. And then also working right now with legislative leaders on developing a transportation agenda for the next legislative session and working in the interim committees. So it's something we're working with, and the membership is pretty reasonable. It's not much more than about, I think depending on the size of the community, it's not a great deal of money. So it's something that I'd encourage you to take a look at. And this way we can show strong support and support for our legislators from around the state for transportation. Helps us to create that strong network. For those of you in Texas that are going to the Transportation Forum next month in San Antonio, we're hosting a reception just prior to the TxDOT opening reception. I think it's at 4 o'clock there at the hotel. Commissioner Ted Houghton, who's chairman of the Transportation Commission, will be the speaker, and there's more information available on that at texastransportation.org. And so I'd encourage you to take a look at that. And again, it's just something that helps to get a united voice to speak on transportation issues and secure funding for those of us here in Texas. And then the next event I wanted to bring up is the 3rd Annual West Texas Trade Summit, which is going to be February 23rd and 24th in San Angelo, Texas. It's hosted by our Ports to Plains Southern Work Group, which is really spearheaded out of the city of San Angelo. And if you've been to the past couple of meetings, it's a great event, bringing a lot of our partners from Mexico, and we really try to address the trade issues and infrastructure needs and opportunities that are available to us with our partners on especially the southern end of the corridor and into Mexico. We've had great participation from our friends in Coahuila, in Mazatlan, and in Durango. And so it's a great thing. And there's a lot of activity going on down there right now. They just had the ribbon cutting for the big bridge that connects Mazatlan to Durango, and that Durango to Matamoros highway is actually, I think, supposed to be finished this year. And then there was a story I saw in one of the newspapers down in Torreon this morning about they're really pushing to finish up that connection from Torreon up to Ports to Plains and that corridor down there. So there's a lot going on down in Mexico, and it's a great opportunity to come and learn about that. Susanna Aguirre at the City of San Angelo is a contact, and you see her contact information there if you're interested in registering for the event. It's usually, like I said, we'll have a day of speakers and presentations, and then we'll go to the rodeo that night, which is one of the biggest rodeos in the country, and then there is meetings, kind of planning meetings the next day. So that gives you a good idea of what's going on, and if there's anything we can do to help, please let us know. And Joe, I think that wraps it up from my end.
As Michael talks about the Transportation Advocates of Texas, I really encourage you to look around your state, and if there's ways you can get involved in statewide organizations such as that. I spent a couple of hours yesterday in an organization called Move Colorado, very much the same kind of thing, and they are in the process of sort of reinventing themselves in a far better set of outreach than they had in the past, and have made it much more affordable for organizations locally and regionally to be members of that and participate. So really look at that. Michael, would you like to talk a little bit about the Keystone decision?
Yeah, I think a lot of you probably have heard by now that the president denied the permit for the Keystone XL pipeline, and I could say it was not this is certainly a disappointment, but not necessarily a surprise. As you recall, the president had tried to put off the decision until after the election, asking for another year. And then as part of the tax credit bill, the payroll tax bill, the Republican leadership in the House put in there that the decision had to be made within 60 days. So I think that was by February 21st. And so the president, in his statements declining the permit, was interesting because he said that it was not because of the merits of the application. It was strictly because of the time frame put on with the deadline, that he was unable to get enough time to make a decision because of the rerouting in Nebraska. So what we're seeing likely, TransCanada has said they're going to reapply for that, reapply for a permit, and then kind of wrap up things in Nebraska. They also, there was a story I saw yesterday where they may actually begin work on the southern portion of the Keystone XL from Cushing, Oklahoma down to the Texas coast. And by doing that while within Texas, they wouldn't have to get a presidential permit for that portion of it, and it would help alleviate some of the glut that's built up there at Cushing. So that's interesting, and so it's interesting to see how it all plays out. Like I said, with TransCanada filing another application, there is a lot of the work has been done. So will they be able to get an expedited ruling, or will we have to go through another 3 years of study on this process? And also the question that comes up is, are there, because some of the legislation that was passed to deal with the pipeline in Nebraska, how will that impact it with the reapplication as opposed to, a brand new application as opposed to the existing project that was already under study? So that remains to be seen, and it's an important issue for us. So we're going to continue to work it, and monitor it, and hopefully we can have something moving forward as soon as possible, because we know it's a big source of jobs here in our region.
Michael has become a superstar in Canada. He's like on television every night and interviewed here and there, and it's been interesting. That whole connection between transportation and energy are really key, and the Keystone certainly affects our folks in North Dakota and Montana and their ability to ship oil to where the refineries are. So lots of things going on. Again, we appreciate you taking the time to be here. If you've got questions, never hesitate to call any one of us. If you've got future topics you'd like to hear about, please let us know. We're trying to do this about once a month just to keep people up to date. The next Ports to Plains board meeting will be just before the Texas Transportation Forum in mid-February in San Antonio. We've got another newsletter that comes out next Monday. They come out every 2 weeks. Encourage you to follow our LinkedIn and Facebook and Twitter, and if you do any of those things, but especially follow the messaging that's coming out in the Ports to Plains blog. On a daily basis, we try to keep you updated on what's happening. With that, I think we'll bring this to a close. Thank you, Jack. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Duffy. And we'll look forward to the next time. Thank you for coming.
Thank you, Joe.